Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bullpen. All right, we have a treat. So in the Bullpen, I have a very special guest that connects back to our work in democracy resilience. Before I go to that, I got a video. Here it is.
The latest PBS News NPR Marist poll out today shows that nearly a third of Americans now believe political violence may be necessary to get the country back on track. That's up from 19% just a year and a half ago. It follows a series of high-profile attacks, including the June killing of a Democratic state legislator and her husband in Minnesota, and the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk in Utah last month.
What's driving that here? Mostly Democrats. Only 12% of Democrats back in April 2024 said this. Now it's up to 28%. A huge jump, really. I mean, statistically very significant. But I will say that Republicans are still higher than Democrats. They're at 31%. So they also went up from 28%, about the same, but still a slight increase. Even a quarter of independents are feeling this way now, having gone up 7 points as well.
A few years ago, I was hired to work at the Carter Center as an advisor to this remarkable but unknown and untried program called Democracy Resilience from the Carter Center. It was domestic, it was intentional, and it was about protecting democracy, civility. The person who hired me, who now is still working in the same industry, but now is the principal at CRD Connect, none other than Nathan Stock. Nathan, good day. Welcome to the program. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, brother. Nathan, I remember when we first started to tackle this, and it was already this political dynamic that said, hey, do you really want to get involved in this? But it was becoming evident that if we don't have an intentional focus on protecting civility and democracy, you won't have a democracy to protect civility in. So if you would, talk about the original launch of this, and we're going to get into the sentiment of political violence that's been echoed in various arenas, both on the left and right.
Sure. Well, Rashad, you're digging up memory lane in a fun way. I came to the Carter Center before the 2020 election. And as I recall, you were one of the first people I brought in when we were trying to set up this experimental cross-partisan civic network in Georgia, bringing community leaders, former political leaders together to push back against dehumanizing rhetoric, vitriol, and violence at the community level. And, through your hard work and other colleagues in Georgia, we pulled together all kinds of folks to run events, promote facts about elections, also respond when there were crises or other incidents. And, as you know, over time, we expanded that work from Georgia to 5 other states. And now I'm doing something somewhat similar up in Minnesota.
Yeah. Some of the surprises that come out of this for me was how much we really have in common if we don't talk about politics. Politics can become very divisive. And so I remember something that Ambassador Andrew Young said many years ago. He said he was effective as an ambassador because when he would go to a foreign leader's country, he would opt to stay at their house rather than stay at the hotel because he knew they were going to have to eat breakfast together. They were going to have to eat lunch and eat dinner. And he said over those opportunities, those impromptu meetings, he was able to discuss everything but politics, able to discuss food, able to discuss wine, able to discuss just life. And that created relationship, right? So let's talk about the work you're continuing to do now. And have you seen a decrease, dear brother, in some of the rhetoric? Is it hopeful in your estimation moving forward?
There's definitely hope. For starters, we still live in a democracy, more or less. And moreover, we all have agency. What we do, what you do, what I do, every single one of us, that matters. Our country is certainly not doomed to steer into the iceberg, right? We can make change. So that for sure gives me hope. It is also fair to say, by some metrics, political violence is up in the last few years. I think the good news is that actual acts of physical violence, even though they make a lot of news, are still vanishingly rare, right? It's about as common as getting struck by lightning. What is more common and very pernicious are the threats that we've seen targeting local public officials, from local election workers, people on school boards, zoning boards even. That's a big problem, and I think it is having something of a chilling effect. But there's a lot we can do about that.
Well, people that are watching and they want to know, well, what are the real threats? What are some of the elements I need to look out for? How can I be involved in protecting democracy, at least locally, for me and my family?
Yeah. So a few recommendations. One is, if you're politically inclined, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, get involved in politics. Run for something, go volunteer for a campaign, and support candidates and parties that lift up people who call us toward a healthier civic and political discourse. That's one. Second, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you sit on, if you lean left and your world, your media diet, your social media is all on the left, find one relationship that you invest in over time with somebody who looks at the world differently from you. Maybe that's a conservative. Maybe you're a conservative, find a liberal. But plan for repeated engagements. Pick that person and decide that you're going to stay in conversation with that individual until you can tell the other person's story, right? You should get to a point where with your cousin Bob, right? You can say, oh, well, Bob believes X, Y, and Z because he had these experiences as a kid, as he came up professionally in his work, he saw X, Y, and Z. That's what shaped him. That's really useful. We have a lot of Americans, especially those of us who are more politically active on the left or the right, that don't have any of those relationships. And it is therefore easier to kind of dehumanize the other side, to imagine that people who vote differently from you are complete space alien monsters. And the antidote to that is to build those kind of relationships.
You talk about polarization. And for some, it is a term utilized for the sake of landing a political point. All right. So if you go to CNN or MSNBC, you hear a debate, they talk about polarization. What's polarization? What is polarization to you? And what do you believe are the biggest contributors to polarization?
So the term that political scientists use is affective polarization. That's the idea that you identify with one political side and you have an instinctive dislike of the other side, not necessarily connected to their policy positions or your differences on tax policy. You don't like them because of who they are, or at least what you think they are. That's the polarization that has gripped our country for some time. In terms of what's driving it, I mean, there's two baskets of things going on here. One is American life is very different from the way it was 40 years ago. Technology is radically different. Communication technology is different. We're living in information silos. Demographics are different. Country's less white. A lot of research about how that is destabilizing to not only our democracy, but a lot of democracies around the world, right? So there are things that have happened over the last few decades that have created conditions very conducive to polarizing. Second piece of this is our human brains. We are wired to identify in tribal groups. And in this stew of technological change and social change and all that, you add our very partisan brains into that, and you could argue that we're just nervous systems swimming in media ecosystems. And you put the two together, and here we are. We are quite divided. It's easy to see how we got into this mess, given the changes in our society over the last few years and the way our brains work.
Let's back up for a moment. I remember the first time we brought those on the left and those on the right together for an event. And we wanted everyone to sing Kumbaya. We collectively told our groups, this is what it's about. Everybody was, yes, we want to protect democracy. We're not talking about politics. But it didn't quite work out that way. It wasn't bad, but people didn't feel safe. People didn't feel comfortable to really express themselves in that kind of environment that soon, because the polarization was still so thick and all these assumptions and biases were still prevalent. Over time, we broke down those barriers, but it took relationship, brother. It took relationship to break down those barriers. And I think, and I want your opinion on this, I think one of the things that we have lost in politics is the relationship angle. And I'm reminded of the civic awards that we give now from the Carter Center when I heard Governor Roy Barnes give his acceptance speech a few days during that time. And then after that, you hear a Republican talk about how they would hang out, even though they had a very, contentious political back and forth, that they understood that they needed to be respectful of each other at the end of the day. And Barnes says something that just totally, made sense. He says he doesn't know how he would respond in the political atmosphere of today. And what does that say to you, Nathan?
Well, for starters, it's honest on his part, and it's thoughtful, right? It's an acknowledgement of the reality that a lot of political figures are in today. But he's onto something, right? I mean, there's, I'm sure you've seen these proposals for reforming Congress, or I've seen versions of this at the state legislative level to make the systems work better. And some of the ideas they throw out there are just changing the calendar, the days of the week in which legislation is discussed, so that not everybody can jet home on the weekends to their home districts. So they have to, stay in DC, or in the case of my state, stay in St. Paul. And then their kids end up in the same little leagues, right? And you have that informal socializing time between leaders on different sides of the aisle, which used to be a big part of what made our politics work. So that humanizing, or the lack thereof, is certainly a piece of this. I mean, I think you could add to that the way fundraising works, especially at the national level, but to some extent at the local level, the way media and elected office intersect, so that you see folks rising through the political ranks, or rising through notoriety, because you can get to Congress and then become a social media star, become a Fox News star, as opposed to working your way up, getting into a committee, learning all about nuclear non-proliferation and doing the grunt work, right? I mean, there are so many incentives that, unfortunately, I think disincentivize serious, thoughtful, bipartisan cooperation, but there are also ways to change that.
Well, let's talk about that. So your pedigree is strong, brother. You are a non-resident scholar in the Middle East Institute, specializing in Palestinian politics and Gaza Strip. You and I have had dinners where we talked on and on about your efforts in those regions, and how difficult it was, how dangerous it was, but also how misinformation and disinformation contributed to the polarization that also contributed to the conflict. What similarities do you see happening with that? Disinformation, misinformation, what's the difference? And what similarities do you see happening in America now?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of working for the late President Carter for many years on his Middle East conflict resolution team. We did a lot of work trying to untie the knot of perpetual armed conflict between Israel and Gaza in years past. Zooming out, when you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a whole, you see two societies, Israelis and Palestinians, that have been locked in a fairly violent conflict for about 100 years. And you see all the ways in which those societies, their politics, their art, their media, everything within those societies over time has been shaped through the prism of the conflict against the other side, right? A lot of Palestinian national identity, what it means to be a Palestinian, is a story of dispossession, right? It's this shared experience of suffering. And of course, Jewish Israelis have a somewhat similar but converse narrative, right? I see echoes of that growing in the United States, right? I see narratives of persecution, a perception that the other side's against me, that my side, my tribe, my political camp is besieged, is under threat. That, I don't want to overstate this, right? This is not Israel-Palestine. There's no war going on here. But for hard, active partisans in the United States, the sense that your guys are always on the defensive, the other guys are always out to get you, that I do see as a common thread between here and there.
And is it not exploitive, dear brother? Because you see it happening, but usually the individuals who are promoting it are the ones who stand to be empowered by it. And they're manipulating their supporters like pawns in order to keep the narrative going. So in a way, it's exploitive in nature, is it not?
Sure. I mean, that's the tragedy of our time, Rashad. Look, the Reagan Foundation out in California, they put out a poll back in March. I mean, I have the numbers exactly right, but something like 73% of Americans want to be part of a solution to restoring civility. 82% expect their elected leaders to work together across the aisle to solve problems. There's all kinds of data on this. 85% of Americans reject political violence. Americans keep telling pollsters that they want a better politics, right? That they don't want this kind of vitriol. And yet, of course, there are financial incentives, the way the two-party system works, single-member competitive districts, the way social media works. There are all these other incentives that if you are, an elected official or even some other kind of elite with a platform that incentivize you to be the worst version of yourself, to incite fear, right? To tell your tribe that the other tribe's coming to get you. So, I mean, the former gives me hope, right? Most Americans don't want this. We want to live in a peaceful society. I want to take my year-old daughter to soccer practice, right? And have a job and have a nice life. Like that, we are all there. The trick then is organizing our voices. To quote Richard Nixon, we're the new silent majority. You, me, the 90% of us that just want to live in a peaceful society. We have to somehow outsmart the algorithms, right? We gotta lift up that voice. And if we're successful in that, then a political approach, a tactic of demonization will backfire, right? Because it's not okay.
I remember that first election after that major disaster, okay? That national thing that none of us thought would ever happen, happened. People stormed the Capitol. And we have an upcoming election. We're hoping democracy will remain intact. And I recall in Georgia, you had the great idea, and it worked actually, of making sure that every candidate signed basically a peace agreement. But the agreement was, here are the things we're going to agree to do. We are going to agree not to support violence against the other. We are going to agree to accept the results of a fair election. We are going to agree. These were things very common in politics traditionally. But this agreement, this set of agreement, we then had to work to get folks to sign it. And I got to tell you, people would assume it was easy to get Democrats to sign it. Hell no, it wasn't easy to get anybody to sign anything, because just like some Republicans, there were Democrats who did not want to automatically accept whatever the election outcome would be in a fair election. And so it took a lot of engagement. But what convinced people are the numbers that you're talking about now, Nathan. The fact that when you poll individual voters, they do not want violence, period.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of where we're at, right? And I would just plug up here in Minnesota, we are currently promoting something we call the Civic Pledge for a Stronger Minnesota. Civic Pledge for a Stronger Minnesota. Google it. Go sign it. It's 4 points, especially if you live in Minnesota.
Awesome.
Don't be a jerk to each other. Don't incite violence. Don't engage in violence. I've been running events around the state, getting people to sign this thing. But this is an example, Rashad, of where all the rest of us are versus some folks in a kind of narrow political class, right? One of the obstacles we ran into, although we ultimately got, Governor Kemp and Stacey Abrams to sign on to those principles, was that a lot of candidates for office and their campaign staff, their first reaction is, I don't sign pledges, regardless of what the pledge says. All we're asking you to do is just agree that you'll accept the election result. That's it. Nope, I don't do that. So here's an example, right? All the rest of us who just see this as common sense. Like, yeah, if you lose an election, you can't lie about it. Don't be a jackass. Accept that you lost and be gracious, right? That's the kind of thing that we can lift our voices up in support of. If you're in Minnesota, sign our Civic Pledge, check out the Carter Center's work and others around these issues, right? There are ways for the rest of us to promote these broad values that are really basic. And if we can do that in strong enough numbers, I think we can get the political class to listen.
Absolutely. And evidenced by the fact we have been able to do so in multiple states now. Nathan, give out that information again for Minnesota for people to sign that.
Civic Pledge for a Stronger Minnesota. or What We Can Do weeks. This set of events we ran after the former House Speaker up here was murdered back in June. Civic Pledge for Stronger Minnesota. Go online, sign it. That'd be a big help.
Thank you, dear brother, for all that you do. We're going to put that website in the post so that we can have that information available for people. Continue fighting the good fight, my friend. It's good to see your face.
You too. Good to see you, man.
All right,
Thanks.
brother.